Om Namo Bhagavate Ramakrishnaya. Dear devotees, as we all announced, today we have got one of the senior monk, Revered Swami, Tyagarupanananda Maharaj. Presently is heading Ramakrishna Mission, Malda, West Bengal, India. Swamiji started his spiritual journey in the Ranchi, and after joining, there are very few monks or brahmacharis were selected by the headquarters who were asked to pursue their academical education. Among them, in the earlier days, Swamiji was one of the chosen person who was asked to pursue his PhD, doctorate in the economics, and he finished his doctorate in economics. And we have got one of the top 10 graduate institutions all over India. One of is called Vidya Mandir, which is the next to Belur Math. So he was teaching for graduation and postgraduate students with respect to economics. And also he was the principal and he was the head of that institute, Vidya Mandir, for a long time. And afterwards, we have got in the whole Bihar and Jharkhand, one of the again reputed top institute, which we have got primary, higher secondary and all. In Devgar, and that is a place of Shiva, holy pilgrimage place of Shiva. There also very reputed institution. I think 450 or 400 students are studying their residential school completely. There Swamiji was heading the Devgar institution. Now presently Swamiji is heading the Ramakrishna Mission, Malda, West Bengal. And when I was in a training center as a novice, and Swamiji used to come and to take class on Brahma Sutra, the logical treatise on Advaita Vedanta. So Swamiji is known for his erudite scholarship, for his deep study, and for his love. And he is such a loving person. In 5 minutes, you can, if anyone talking with him, you can understand and you can feel that love with the Swamiji. So reverentially, on behalf of Air Vedanta Society and assembled devotees, reverentially, I welcome Maharaj.
So, thanks all of you for inviting me today to this Vedanta Society. The specific topic of discussion today is how to face difficulties, lessons from Bhagavad Gita. Rather a longish topic, I would say. But we would confine our discussion to, say, broadly 40 minutes, and we can have some Q&A after that. Actually, this was the second leg of my coming here. I had come to Dublin a few days earlier. I was then staying at the house of Professor Siddhartha Shin and Mrs. Anita Shin. At the time, I had the opportunity to come across some devotees of this ashrama, a larger perspective. I come to see many new faces. So, landing today, and this challenge of difficulties, how to face the Bhagavad Gita, like many of the Indian scriptures, start off with an incident, rather a story. If you ask Indians why Bhagavad Gita is popular, or why the epic of which Bhagavad Gita is only a part of is popular, I think many would be first starting off with the description of a battlefield, actually, because Bhagavad Gita was set in a battlefield, actually. So just to briefly narrate to you what happened prior to the Bhagavad Gita, rather, it was this, that actually there were two warring clans of princes of the warrior groups who were termed as Kshatriyas in Hinduism. One was known as the Pandavas, who were of the righteous kind. And another was a close relative of theirs. They were known as the Kauravas. The Pandavas and the Kauravas, they had been reared up in the same palace, but as they grew up, the Pandavas turned out to be of the righteous kind, virtuous kind. They would be praised by the scholars of the day. And in the course of time, because they were liked by the scholars, they were properly adored by the subjects of the place, and finally because their eldest brother, Yudhishthira, was the eldest among all of them. He was put on the throne. But the other clan, as I said, they were near relatives. The Kauravas had in their father, Dhritarashtra, a totally blind person, always envious of the Pandavas, trying by hook or crook to dislodge them from the rightful ownership of the empire. This brought in many twists and turns in the tale. But finally, what it came to and the Kauravas, who were more in number, because there were 100 Kaurava brothers, while the Pandavas, how many of them were there? Only 5. In terms of numbers, the Pandavas were always lesser. But in terms of strength, by virtue, by the different qualities they had, the Pandavas were superior. So the head of the Kauravas, Duryodhana, finally invited Yudhishthira to a game of dice. Aksha Krida. Krida is play and Aksha is dice. Just as in medieval age you would see the knights of old in Europe, if one would invite another to a game of sword, a duel, it was considered an ignominy to deny such an invitation. Similarly, when Yudhishthira was invited by the crooked Duryodhana to a game of dice, he had to rather accept the invitation. And he was very fond of Aksha Krida as well. But as I said, Duryodhana, ever jealous of the Pandavas, was a cunning person. Again and again, through various devices, rather crooked means, Yudhishthira started losing out on the game of dice. The game of dice, I would compare it, it is very close to the game of chess that is very popular. It used to be played on a board. It's on the game of dice. Suppose there are 2 parties, one sitting on the 2 sides of the board. Each of them had to keep something as a pawn, a promise. That is, if you lose your turn in this game, you would lose that particular pawn. In course of time, as the game proceeded, Yudhishthira started losing one by one all of his possessions. And finally, he even kept his brothers as pawns. Okay. Since his brothers were very obedient to him, very obliging, and finally lost possession of his brothers too. So finally, what happened was then, Kauravas became the owners, so to say, of his brothers too. But didn't stop there. Finally, Yudhishthira kept their wife, Draupadi, as a pawn as well. Draupadi, a very intelligent lady, when Yudhishthira lost Draupadi too, the Kauravas, especially the eldest among them, as I mentioned, the first person was Duryodhana. There was another very cunning and of the very cruel kind. I hope you remember the another one was Dushashana. Okay. So Dushashana in the open court started disrobing Draupadi, and added to it, Duryodhana dishonored Draupadi in different ways. So this finally didn't materialize, but what happened was it sowed the seeds of a war. Because among the Pandavas were two valiant fighters. All of them were fighters, but the most valiant among them was Arjuna, or he would be addressed as Partha. That was a different name for Arjuna. And there was Bhima Chandra, the very muscular kind, strong kind. And Bhima made very bold promises in the court that day that he would kill Dushashana and Duryodhana, the two cruel brothers who today on the table of Aksha had won the game of dice. But finally, what transpired was Yudhishthira was divested. He lost all his kingdom. And to rub salt on the wound, Yudhishthira and the Pandavas, they had to go to the forest for long. How many years? No, 12 years. In the Ramayana, Ramchandra had to go for 14 years. So they were sent to the forest for 12 years without any possessions, without any of the titles which they had acquired over time. But there was still more insult for them. After the 12th year, they had to stay totally unknown. It was known as Agyata Vasa. Agyata means without knowledge. You don't reveal your own identity, and Vasa is staying. There was another very difficult clause there. During this 1 year of Agyata Vasa, which would follow the 12th year of being banished to the forest, if you are detected who you are, that is, you are the Pandavas, then you have to come around in the whole cycle again, 12 plus 1. Difficult clause, okay? So finally, that too was over. At the end of the 13th year, they had come back and they politely requested of the Kauravas, led by their king at that time, the eldest one, Duryodhana, to give back their rightful kingdom. But Duryodhana had then already tasted blood. He consulted his ministers. Many of them were of the very cunning kind. They would give him rather wrong advice than the proper ones, and then refused to give the Pandavas their kingdom. He, of course, knew the consequences, because there were many among the fighting clans who sympathized with the Pandavas. In fact, many of the elders in the court of Duryodhana himself were sympathetic towards the cause of the Pandavas. Most important, Bhishma and Dronacharya. Just to remind you, the battle of Mahabharata, which followed, was held for 18 days. And the Kaurava generals are more known than the Pandavas. Although finally the Pandavas won this war, which practically led to the killing of most of the Kshatriya clans. But the generals who are more important in our history, in our folklore, are the Kaurava generals. The Kaurava generals were respectively, the first two was Bhishma, the grandsire, and secondly was Dronacharya. He was the common teacher of archery, of weapons, of the Pandavas and the Kauravas. So although Duryodhana knew that many in the Kshatriya clan, it's somewhat similar to politics which you see, isn't it? Politics, this was also a court politics actually. So in politics, it's a game of numbers. game of how many people sympathize with you. Similarly, for the Pandavas and the Kauravas too, before coming to that flashpoint of a war, people were gauging their numbers, counting their sympathizers. Isn't it? So Duryodhana knew that if he denied the Pandavas their rightful share to the kingdom, the Pandavas had been very polite. They had said, you see, let's divide up the kingdom so that you stay in one part, the Kauravas, because for the long 13 years you had now ruled over this kingdom. We wouldn't deny you any part of the kingdom. It's not that. You will have half of this kingdom for yourself. And the other half, let us have it for ourselves. But Duryodhana made a very rash and bold statement. It comes in a poem by Rabindranath Tagore. He said, you see, the amount of mud that sticks to the end of a needle, I wouldn't give them even that portion of the kingdom. Okay. The Pandavas tried various means because they were of the virtuous kind. They sent finally Krishna, who was deemed to be a strong person, but a just person, as counsels, as their messengers to the court of Kauravas. But even then, Duryodhana didn't relent. Finally, it was inevitable that the war was about to happen. Today also another war is going on, the Ukraine war, isn't it? Even today in the modern age, we have proceeded that far. We are down in a new millennium. Even then, people haven't been able to shed all their angers, all their instincts, wrong instincts rather. When a country is pulverized, millions of people lose their lives. But some dictators at one end push the entire population into a war. So even it happens now, you can imagine that it had happened earlier as well. So this epic Mahabharata, of which Bhagavad Gita is a part, narrates, or rather starts with the opening scene is thus: Kauravas on one side, Duryodhana, remember the name, and the Pandavas on the other. They are standing on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Very difficult Sanskrit names, but in the story these must come in. Any of you have gone to Kurukshetra? You've gone, bah. You've gone to Kurukshetra, bas. So Kurukshetra is just off Delhi. Means it's now in the state of Haryana. Haryana is a prominent state now in India. And Kurukshetra is still there with its memories. Of course, it's now a modern city as well. By the side of the battlefield, you have a modern city coming up. So there, as the final battle cries had been made, the two sides, they had blown the conch shells. In those days, conch shells were like bugles in today. The bugles of today. I had been to Scotland a few days earlier. I saw the bagpipes being played even today. In the Windsor Castle, when the Queen comes in, bugles are very important. Bagpipers play the bugle. So even then, conch shells, or music rather, was used to symbolize, signal the advent of a war or the start of the war. Every person, every fighter had a conch shell in his hand. So they would blow the conch shell. Why was music necessary? Because it was a leap to death for these fighters. All of them knew that this battle would lead to the destruction of many in the fighting clan. And it could be himself as well, the fighter as well. So when they leave behind their family members, leave behind their possessions and their kingdom, and come to this battlefield. It was a fight to death. They thought it was a justful war. Either they were for the Pandavas or the Kauravas. Okay, everyone was there in a horse chariot. They were being driven by horses. Say, Arjuna was in a horse chariot and it was being driven by Krishna. As you would see later on, as it comes in the storyline, Krishna had taken up a resolve. He had taken up a promise, he had given a promise that he wouldn't take up arms during the war. Okay. So he kept that promise. He decided to stay as a charioteer for Arjuna. So as the battle is about to start, Arjuna is in the chariot, Krishna is his charioteer, and Arjuna and the others are just prepared to start the battle. Just before a big examination, as you go into the hall, a certain nervousness creeps within us, doesn't it? Suddenly you feel your feet getting cold. Of course, many of the older persons now, I too had been teaching for a long time. Every time that my students would go to the hall, many times I would feel, okay, at least I won't have to appear for examinations anymore. These are over for us. Okay, so in a broader sense, at every point of time, or rather every day, there are examinations. You have to take decisions in life. Sometimes these decisions are conscious ones or bigger decisions, but sometimes you have smaller ones. Some, as we say in biology, there are voluntary decisions and involuntary ones. Suppose when you breathe, you do not sit back and decide how to breathe. So that you do as a voluntary exercise. But there are some which are consciously made, some decisions consciously made. You know the pros and cons. So the battlefield on that day, when they had come in, they had come after a lot of deliberation. They had weighed the pros and cons and finally had decided to come to the battlefield. But like the reluctant student who goes to the examination, Arjuna too suddenly, as he surveyed the army standing in front of him, the Kauravas, and looked back at the Pandavas, his own army, he suddenly was at a loss of words. He thought rather that this battle was agreed rather on their part. To Krishna, he would say, almost as a sermon. This comes from the first chapter of that book, Gita. He says that, you see, even if we win this battle, this would be tantamount to eating food smeared with blood. Because if we win the battle and get back our kingdom once more, it would obviously be followed by the death of the Kauravas. To win back our kingdom, we must engage in this war. And this would mean the death of many in the fighting clan, including my distant relatives, the Kauravas. So probably it would be better. Arjuna is almost in a soliloquy, he says, probably it would be better if we give up this battlefield, give up this battle and go away and live our lives on alms, that is begging. Benefit is the word you use here. Live on benefit rather. So Arjuna says that, well, why should we kill so many persons to get back our logical share of the kingdom? So apparently speaking, when you go to the story for the first time, many people from outside India who read the story of the Mahabharata for the first time, they feel that, you see, what Arjuna is saying apparently is perfectly right. He says that you mustn't engage in the war, and all of them must give up our weapons and be friends once again. This was perfectly right. But see, Arjuna has these vacillations in the mind. Do the Kauravas have this? No. So Krishna is wise enough. He goes on listening to the blabberings of Arjuna. Okay, it goes on for the first chapter actually. Yeah? Finally, Arjuna, after all the lecturing, says, you see, my mind is in a rotation, it's spinning. I don't know what to do. He has a famous bow in his hand. It was named as Gandiva. Huh? Just like you have today very well-known weapons, AK-47, okay. Kashalnikov rifles. So similarly, Gandiva is that famous in Indian Puranas, in the Indian folklore. So even gives up this Gandiva. He puts it at the back of his chariot and tells Krishna, you see, please advise me on what is proper, what is to be done. The rightful teacher, the proper teacher, you have many teachers here, you have Professor Siddhartha Sen amongst us. The proper teacher, he would really wait for the right opportunity when to teach a person. Maharaj too has been taking a number of classes here. So when does a student really pay undivided attention to the words of teacher? When he or she feels the real necessity for an advice. Before that, as it's said, it's like, they say, it's like throwing pearls before swine, as they say. If you throw pearls where it's undesirable, not necessary, then even the costliest of advice would bear no fruit. It would be of no use. So Krishna, the right teacher, he waited for the point when Arjuna was prepared to take his advice. When Arjuna says that he is ready for advice, then he starts counseling Arjuna. I'll come back to today's world. Of course, it's a very gross example. I remember in the year 1998, probably, in the World Cup finals of football, there, two countries had gone to the World Cup finals. If you remember, the World Cup football finals were held in France that year. And at that time, the most important player of Brazil, probably his name too was Ronaldo. He finally, on the eve of the finals, said, I won't be able to play that day. Finally, he was brought to play on the field, but as I learned, or we learned rather, that he wasn't fully fit. And that day, to the surprise of everyone, France, the hosts of the World Cup, won the World Cup very easily. Probably the score was, and if you remember the score for the 1998 World Cup, probably it was 3-0. 3-0. Means probably none of the French supporters too had imagined that they would have such a cakewalk. It was very similar. If the main warrior of a group is suddenly disabled, unable to fight, then it demoralizes all his friends, the entire group as well. Krishna was very aware of this. Slowly, how does he counsel Arjuna? That's really a beauty. The point is, why did Krishna engage Arjuna into the war? Or to put it the other way around, when you face difficulties in life, what should be your attitude in facing such difficulties? Should you give up? Should you escape? Should you go away? Or should you face it boldly? Even it means the killing of, the death of your near and dear ones. So that was indeed a challenge. To Krishna, he understood that, well, Arjuna was fully mentally armed for this war, fully. Because for the last 13 years, even when they were banished to the forest, Arjuna had picked up the nuances of many new and newer weapons. As the Mahabharata story says, the storyline says, Arjuna even went up to the gods to acquire, to learn new weapons. Because Arjuna had a long-standing rivalry with one in the Kaurava clan. Who was that? Karna, right? So Karna and Arjuna, you have a similar competition between two footballers, two boxers, two cricketers. It happens. So for these persons, fighting, archery, wielding the weapon was like games, sports at the highest level. Of course, it was not an easy one because it could lead to the destruction of their lives. Why don't you have such sports today as well? Say the boxing, very fatal ones it can be, okay? Or motor racing, sometimes. Every year, there is a place nearby, probably in Ireland or England, where I hear there are deaths every year from racing. But still the race goes on. People sometimes are enamored of adventures. They like adventures. So for the Kshatriya clan, additionally, they were fighting for justice. They were fighting for a cause. They were the defenders of what was right, what was just. So this applied both ways, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. Krishna gradually started advising Arjuna. What did he say? How did he bring around a reluctant person to the war? He understood very well that if by chance Arjuna left the battlefield, it would be comparable to a person coming for the Commonwealth game. It was held a few months earlier, isn't it, London? And suddenly becoming nervous before the final whistle of the game. In today's sports also, such psychological breakdowns happen today. And then, if he suddenly leaves the sports arena and the Commonwealth Games are over, he or she would lament later on. What a great wrong I have done. I have let go an opportunity where I could establish myself. For the last 4 years, I have acquired so many skills in that particular game. And now when the final moment comes of displaying your dexterity, you suddenly got nervous. It was similar with Arjuna also. If Arjuna had left the battlefield, Krishna knew very well, he would soon lament his own decision. If by chance the battle was left to the whims of Arjuna, that would finally count for his own lamenting as well. This was one thing. But Krishna didn't give this logic to Arjuna to begin with, because Arjuna was in such a morbid state that such advice would have fallen on stone. Krishna rather told him, he started with the very obvious ones. Because I tell you these little facts or little stories, why? Because in today's world, when you take a decision, when you face difficulties in life, you have various logics arranged in your favor and some against you whenever you take a decision, isn't it? So all of us mentally, we weigh the decision, either this or that. Sometimes it can so happen that when our minds are clouded, unable to take a decision, you are not able to see clearly the different points, rather than different aspects of your decision. Sometimes it can so happen that you require a friend, a teacher, a counselor who can guide you gently along the path. After you have been guided along and you are out of the tunnel, then you feel, Baba, what a great mistake I was about to commit. This was something similar that Arjuna had landed into actually. So Krishna started off with saying, you see, it may be that you are a wise person, an intelligent one, Arjuna, okay? But all of these persons, you only have invited for the war. If suddenly you tell them that you won't fight, they would be puzzled. They would say, why, after all, did you invite to fight for you? Why did you send messengers to our kingdom, requesting us to fight in your favor? The Kaurava warriors too, the other side, you can compare to the Second World War, you had this Allied and Axis forces, the two fighting against each other. So it was similar. All the important princes of India, they had come to the battlefield. The fighting clan, the Kshatriyas, were supposed to protect their own kingdom. They thought they were protecting virtue, righteousness. And they had come to fight either for the Pandavas or for the Kauravas, either for the Allied or for the Axis forces, the two sides, Allied or Axis. Okay. So first counsel which Krishna gave was, you see, it would cause buddhi bheda. It would cause confusion in the minds of these persons. You know, you mustn't do that. Be steady in what you have asked for earlier. And besides, so Arjuna, Krishna pricked him to the quick. He said, you see, these Kshatriyas, they would think Arjuna is a nervous person. He can't fight in the battle. We had heard that he was a mighty archer, but suddenly in the battlefield, he cannot fight anymore. Would you like to hear such words from others? Are you prepared to face such ignominy? So Arjuna, there's a line in Shakespeare which said that, you see, fame is the last infirmity. You can give up your possessions, you can give up your money, but you mustn't give up your good name. So Krishna touched on that. He said, Partha, Arjuna, you mustn't allow others to blame you like this, to tell that you are a coward. First point. Then he said, you see, philosophical advice from Bhagavad. He said, going still deeper, he said, you see, for a Kshatriya or for any mortal person whatsoever, death is inevitable, either today or tomorrow. Have you heard of anyone who is immortal, who lives on? None. So when death is sure, death is something that you cannot avoid for long. Why don't you fight for a just cause and fight for a hero's death rather? There's a line in the Gita which says, Hato va prapsyasi swargam, jitva va bhoksyase mahim. It says, you see, if you are killed in the battlefield, hata, if you are killed, you will go to the heavens. Prapsyasi swargam. And well, if you win the battlefield, in the battlefield, if the others are killed, hatova prapsyasi swargam jitva va bhoksyase mahim, then this entire land of India would be yours. Either you go to the heavens or you become the justful king of this entire land of India. Both ways you gain rather. When you fight, when you engage yourself in a just work, do not fly, do not avoid. Second counsel, okay? Second, different levels of counsel. Then he says, you see, after all, haven't you heard in our philosophies that we are essentially the Atman, the soul. indestructible. You are lamenting the destruction of the body. When you say that your relatives will be killed, you are essentially thinking about their bodily death. But the soul within, it is immortal, it's immortal. Hasn't it been declared in the Upanishads such? Then he gives a wonderful simile. It's such a graphic simile. He says that when every year our clothes get torn, we give them up and wear newer clothes. Okay. Vasansi jirnani yatha bihaya navani grinhati nara parani. Put in very simple English, this, when these clothes become jirna, that is torn, unusable, what happens? A person gives them up. Vihaya, give up. Ha dhatu means to give up. What does he do then? Nabani grinhati. He or she takes up newer ones. Nara aparani. Apara is others. So when the clothes become dirty, unusable, you give them up and take on newer ones. Similarly, he says, now Atmana also, when this body becomes unusable, you have had a heart attack, you have Alzheimer's, the corona has come heavily on you, say. Of course, the cloud of corona has thankfully gone away by this time. When it has come, then one day or another, you are prepared to die. Every person, when he's about to die, or she is about to die, if he is conscious or she is conscious, she knows or he knows that the time has finally come when you cannot cling on to this body anymore. This realization comes to everyone, if he or she is conscious. Of course, we are not philosophers. We do not know what happens hereafter. That's a different question. But the life within cannot remain in this body anymore. This body is unsuitable for use. This is obvious. You look at the eyes of your relatives, they too are expecting when you are about to pass away. Okay? So you understand that it's no longer possible to continue anymore. Sri Ramakrishna, in the Gospel, he says, the Ramakrishna Kathamrit, he says, sometimes the doctor comes in and says, don't be afraid, I am there to save you. There are doctors here actually. And then he says the Ishvara, the God, he smiles from behind and says, I have decided to take away this life. How is it that the doctor still persists with his own counsel to this patient? So beyond the point, of course, our efforts don't count anymore, because in Sanskrit there's a concept, you see, anything which is a combination, a samanvaya combination, must one day disintegrate. The body too is a samanvaya of the different elements. Kshiti, then up, Tej, Marut, and Vyom. Respectively, the air, the water, the wind, the fire, then the akasha, that's space, different elements. They come together, combine together, as it were, to create the different elements in this world. What we see, what we perceive, what we hear. It can be the body, it can be the table, everything. At one point of time, this would disintegrate, these would disintegrate. So the body must disintegrate at a point of time. But the Upanishad says that there is a reality which is indestructible. Then Arjuna now is counseled on that lines. Of course, Arjuna now is at that point is too nervous, too unshakable in his own wrong convictions to listen to those advice. So what does a good teacher do beyond the point? Sri Ramakrishna says, a good teacher sometimes, he would take his student or a patient and then force the medicine down his throat, he says. Uttamacharya, good teacher. So Krishna then shows his horrific form. It comes in the Bhagavad Gita. Just to remind you of an incident which happened later. Before the atom bomb was first blasted in Japan, there were 2 consecutive bomb droppings in the Second World War. It was tested first. The project was known as Manhattan Project. And there, among the scientists who were there in charge, was one. His name was Robert Oppenheimer. So this person was fond of the Bhagavad Gita. He used to read the Gita. And when the bomb was dropped in the deserts of, I think, the desert of Nevada, and then the huge blue flame came, then he remembered one sloka which comes in the Gita. This sloka says, you see, I am the Mahakala. Sri Krishna says to Arjuna, I am the Mahakala. Kala asmi, loka kshaya krit prabridha. I lead to the destruction of all these persons, all this world at one point of time. Lokan samahartum iha pravritta. All these persons that you see in the battlefield, that are like pawns on a chessboard, the Kauravas and the Pandavas, all of them, one day they would come to destruction. So you mustn't think about this so much. You know that this is inevitable. Knowing thus, you fight. So this was another counsel, another level of counsel rather. Okay. The question is, when we face our difficulties in life, how would we decide on them? How to solve them? I remember when we were young, sometimes the logic would be, why? You take a decision according to what is you are clear in your conscience about. What Viveka says, Viveka means discrimination or the proper conscience. Actually, Viveka sometimes doesn't work that way. Viveka is largely governed by, or it largely comes from the teachings that you have had, the convictions that you have carried on with the entire life, the practices that you have adhered to, so that in times of difficulty, such discrimination can come to your mind. I'll give you an example, okay? You take a walk every day in the area nearby, okay? And then you see a doctor, you see the name on his door, a doctor is there. Of course, you do not always go up to him and make him a friend. Then you forget it in the meantime. Suddenly, someone falls ill in your house. At that point of time, your knowledge, it crops up. It says, oh, well, I know that there's a doctor round the corner. So when does this discrimination come in? When you already have had a knowledge that there's a doctor here. So unless we are prepared sufficiently, this viveka or discrimination won't work actually. Suppose a student hadn't studied well, and now he comes to the examination table and he gets his question, and he does a meditation there. Okay. Even then, can his discrimination help him bring out the answers? It won't. First, he has got to study well. He or she must study well. Load his memory with the proper answers, with the proper teachings that what he had studied in the class. Then only these would come out like the proverbial hat at the right time, which you can wear on the answer table, isn't it? So you have got to have the right knowledge so that you can take a decision when you are in difficulty. So to be in difficulty, just as you put a fire alarm in your house, even if a fire hasn't been there for long, you must have a proper arsenal with which you have got to fight. The question is, what is that arsenal? What should we be armed with? Actually, today's world, difficulties come in various levels, at various levels, aren't it? Isn't it? So difficulties can come, they say, as we say in the scriptures, it can come from the outside world. You have a thunderstorm, you are caught in the rains. The forces of nature, which are not under your control, you are suddenly prey to them. This is number one. Number two is your own body doesn't work well. Everywhere you have good sunshine. The climate is pleasant. But suddenly I feel that I have had a heart attack now. Everyone is gossiping in the room, but I suddenly feel a breathlessness. So difficulties can come from within my own body. It can come from nature. Or it can come from other creatures, from men or animals. Outside nature is good, my body is okay. But when you look at others, you don't feel that you have friends. So these are the various places from which, broadly classified, you can have your difficulties from. Why do you trace back these difficulties? Because when you, like a doctor asking you to go to the pathological lab and do your proper testing, when you know the source of your difficulties, then you also look at solutions thereon, how to solve them. Why should we read the Bhagavad Gita or books similar to the Gita? Because you see that such great persons were in difficulty, had looked up for advice and could tide over such difficulties. Swami Vivekananda gave a series of lectures in America, Gita 1, Gita 2, and Gita 3. There he makes a wonderful remark. He says, you see, often people complain, I don't have time for religious exercises or philosophical exercises. I think all of us complain this way, okay? I look at the TV news, I look at the WhatsApp news, okay? I chat long hours for friends, but when the time comes for sitting for meditation, I'm restless. I feel that my office work is pending. I've got to have my laundry clothes done properly. Okay. Various excuses come in the mind. Not only that, if you sit for meditation, suddenly you'll see there is a thought which is hitting you from behind. It'll tell you, why are you sitting for meditation? Why are you trying to sit quietly? Don't you have many other works for tomorrow lined up? Prepare them properly. When you still try to silence such thoughts, it would say, okay, one thing you do, you prepare for little time, okay? Then you come back again for meditation. Then in this way, when you come back finally, you will say already 3 hours had gone in the middle. You think that you would engage in 10 minutes, but one after another, there would be a trail of duties, as it were. So our own mind is our enemy. Our own mind is our friend, the Gita would say. Our own mind can sometimes act as an enemy and sometimes as a friend. So mind which is properly tutored, that would act as a friend. So for that, you need reading proper books, having the right advice, or having good friends and companions. Sri Ramakrishna would tell about Sat Sangha. Sat means honest, good. If you had good companions for yourself, you would have rich thoughts. Isn't there an English proverb? A person is known by the company he or she keeps. Or there's another one, birds of the same feather, what? Flock together. Okay, often we ignore such phrases, but it is important. Where you come, such thoughts actually, they flock your mind. There's a tanmatra, as we say in Sanskrit. There's a thoughts are there in the air. When you come to a place, it's like taking a dip in the river, in the ocean, unconsciously. When you stay at a place, you gradually sink yourself in those thoughts. When you go back to your own houses, such thoughts would definitely come in. Don't think that you have wasted your time coming to this Ayurveda society. Ensure that you come regularly. Okay, with this, I end my talk, and I'll thank Swami profusely, because he had mentioned that I had done some research after coming to the Ramakrishna Mission. He too had done similar research in philosophy. So we, in that sense, are in the same boat. Of course, we are both sannyasins of the Ramakrishna Mission. We, in that sense, we are brother monks as well. But in our own area, we are pursuing our own kind of works. Often, the kind of work that persons like them are doing in the West is difficult. Working, preaching, compared to the kind of service work that we mainly undertake in India. Okay, thanks to all. Now you can have your questions.
Have you got any questions about today's topic or any other questions?
In question and answers, often the first question takes a little time. Then you have a barrage of questions. That's the yes.
Could Yudhishthir have not taken up the challenge and not played the dice with or would have stopped?
Okay, these are ifs and buts. Okay, but the point is actually yes. Every honest person also has small weaknesses in his character, her character. In Bengali, we have read about that Behula Lakhinder story, remember? Behula Lakhinder, as fathers. Okay. Behula Lakhinder is the story of a zamindar, of a prince, who was ordained to be bit by a snake. Okay, bit by a snake. So his wife, very devoted, her name is Behula. She gets a house built of iron. Okay. But even then, the serpent frightens the artisan to make a small hole in the house. Okay. And through that hole, the snake creeps in and bites. So all of us, human beings, have some weaknesses in the character. Through that, there could be downfalls. And of course, through such errors, through such downfalls, we emerge better. Yes.
I have a question.
Nitish Babu, yes.
So Arjuna asked this question to Krishna, the way you told us that he got nervous before the real test. He asked the question and Krishna explained to him. So the question that I have in my mind,
Okay.
should Arjuna had at all asked that question? Or rather, if I say, if I'm in a situation like this and I know everything is inevitable, that it's should I at all ask a question when I'm in a situation?
Then of course this topic wouldn't come up at all. The topic was what happens when you face difficulties. Arjuna had faced a difficulty, he was unable to decide whether to fight or not. Actually, if Arjuna knew that this was inevitable, he would also have known that this war was inevitable, and he would have merely gone into the war.
You knew it, yes.
But in reality, it doesn't happen, isn't it? In reality, there are confusions in the mind. And it so happens, as in the spiritual traditions it is said, that these doubts in the mind, when they are properly explained or very simply put to the teacher, then only he or she, the teacher, can give the cure for the disease, isn't it? That is why I said that in the first chapter, Krishna was waiting for Arjuna to finally surrender himself to him. Remember, Arjuna is a great warrior. And in that war, Krishna is the charioteer, driver for Arjuna. But Krishna was a very wise person, and he knew that Arjuna was crumbling gradually, psychologically. So when Arjuna requires the advice, he gave the advice. Can any of us say that we haven't been passed through difficulties in life? Can you? Prithvi Prabhu, can you say that? I hope not.
Every day.
Yes. So difficulties would be there always, isn't it? Acha. Yes. Siddharth Prabhu.
So here you have given the view of how Arjuna was, the clarity of thought came back. Why didn't Krishna do the same thing for the other side?
Acha. Acha. So Siddharth Prabhu's question, more simply put, would be that
Split the
yes,
kingdom.
yes. So why didn't he bring along justice earlier? That is, Gandhari, the wise queen, in fact, had accused Krishna later on these lines. That Krishna, with his wisdom, whether he was divine or not, these are moot questions. He was a wise person, very intelligent, a great warrior as well. Okay. That, well, he could have brought about a truce, a peace. But sometimes, even with the best of efforts, such truce isn't possible, isn't it? Didn't Hitler know, or the Allied forces know, that the Second World War would soon bloom out of proportions? It would gradually absorb more and more countries. Don't you think that the generals of Hitler or his counselors, didn't they advise them? But sometimes we get deaf to such advice. Okay, that's it. And Krishna probably also saw through. Sri Ramakrishna gives this example. Or Ma Sarada gives this example. She said, you see, sometimes it can so happen that there is a lot of weeds growing in your garden, in your house, okay? And you clear it all up so that newer plants can grow. So there comes a time where you need to feel that newer virtues, newer standards, newer thoughts, newer persons must come in, a cycle, okay? Krishna probably felt that the time had come for these groups of Kshatriyas to go away and newer ones to come. In fact, I tell you, the story of Krishna is narrated in great details in another book, Vishnu Purana. As you would be knowing, the epic Mahabharata is the story mainly of the Kaurava and the Pandava clans. The life of Krishna is given in details in the Vishnu Purana or in the Bhagavad. So in the Vishnu Purana comes one story, or one incident rather. As you know, when Krishna passed away, before that there was an internecine war, a rivalry between the persons of the Yadava clan. You remember that? Any of you can say what the place was, which place it happened? Slightly tricky question. Prabhas, right? Prabhas is a place in Gujarat today, on the western coast of India. I've gone to Prabhas. Actually, what happened was Krishna understood that they were going to fight amongst themselves. As the story goes, that someone cursed them, that you would die fighting amongst yourselves. Krishna saw through that, advise them again and again to behave properly, not to indulge in improper actions. But it so happened that he couldn't prevent that, the wisest of persons. Okay. Even then, he can't prevent the destruction of his own clan. And finally, when he gives up his body, then the Vishnu Purana gives this wonderful verse. Put in English, this would mean, you see, sometimes a fisherman, he casts a net. Just as I heard in Ireland, there are ports where fresh fishes arrive. Okay. Prithvi Prabhu had taken me to departmental store. So when a fisherman casts a net, then after a time, he draws the net to himself. The fishes are there and he leaves with them. Similarly, Krishna, as it were, for the Yadava persons, he had cast the net. They had played their parts. Now he was drawing the net and they would pass away, die along with him. So these changes come with time. In fact, in the 11th chapter, of which I gave a very brief description, I referred to Robert Oppenheimer's story. There he says to Arjuna, well, you see, you are fighting with these persons. You are lamenting that unfortunately you have to kill your own teacher, Dronacharya, who had taught you archery. Or the grandsire Bhishma. Look at me. Then Krishna saw this, the Vishwarupa Darshana, universal form, the terrific, horrific form. He saw that there, the different warriors all killed, smashed in the teeth, Mahakala, this horrific form. It would be similar to the Kali form that we often worship, isn't it? Kali. Kali has a horrible form. In one part, she is benign. She gives blessings. The other part, she destroys. Isn't it? This is Kali. Similarly, Ishvara also sometimes destroys to create again. Krishna probably thought that the time was ripe for a change, for this group of Kshatriyas to go away. Without destruction, they can't be amended any further. Okay. Yes.
And why does the human mind cling easily to objective reality of things and understand the subjective truth of our ancient philosophy? And how do you look at the bigger picture in any circumstance?
Can you please, once again?
So, and why do we cling very easily to the objective reality of things rather than understand the subjective truth of our ancient philosophy?
That's a very good question, actually. He's one person who has taken down the notes. So actually, there's the yoga philosophy, of which all of you have heard. Actually. Yoga. Yoga comes from the verb, the root verb, yuj. Yoga means to bridge, to connect. Yoga tells how to connect yourself to the object on which you concentrate. Why can't you do that? Yoga says, Patanjali Yoga Sutra is there. Yoga Sutra means an aphorism. It says, because we have various diversion, distractions. These are known as vikshepa, distractions. Where do these vikshepa come from? They say that, well, some you have acquired in these lives, in this life, rather. You have heard from others. Sruta, you have heard. You have read about that. You have read a lot about ghost stories, suppose. Huh? You have heard from your grandmother as well. When you go in the night time, you feel a ghost is coming from that side. You see a cinema on Dracula, you feel that, you see, that tree stands like a Dracula there. Then you put on the lights and you laugh at yourself. So silly. I was thinking about a ghost. So why did such thought come up in your mind? Just look back. It came because you had listened to such stories. You had thought for that time, at that point of time, that such ghosts were indeed real. Your whole mind you have put because of probably of a story. Sometimes you hear the story, but there is a child within all of us which likes to hear stories, isn't it? For the time being, you had believed in that story. When you read the Harry Potter stories, it was so popular. I remember in our monastery, we had brought in some of the Harry Potter stories. A sannyasin told me, Maharaj, you must read these books. I said, what do you mean? A tome of 700 pages. He tells me, Maharaj, you try. And I still remember when I started reading it, and finally when I completed the first two, I remember. Then I start thinking, hey Baba, I consider myself to somewhat of an intellectual. But today I went on reading the Harry Potter. It was so interesting. I'd be ashamed to tell to others. Ghost stories, Dumbledore, headmaster, there's the two houses, they fight with each other, the imaginary stations. In fact, I just went to Scotland a few days earlier. The writer is from Edinburgh. And Harry Potter trains they have named actually. Okay? When you go to the Highlands, the trains are there, two trains that were they've named Harry Potter trains. So the fairy tales, the ghost stories are we'd like listening to them. Okay. So what I wanted to say is some of the illusions that we hear again and again often come like truisms to us. We start believing in them. Vedanta says, similarly, you believe that this body is permanent. Like that illusion that you believed in earlier. When Maharaj tells you Vedantic stories and tells you that no, you are immortal, at the core of your mind, you say, what does Maharaj say? When I have fallen ill during the Corona time, I was breathless. I needed a doctor. Did advice help me at the time? You feel it that way, isn't it? So somehow in Vedanta, this is known as Adhyasa. He just referred a little earlier to the Vedanta Sutras. That is a wonderful discussion, this book on Adhyasa. Adhyasa means superimposition. Superimposition means in believing in what you really are not. Sometimes when people come to the ashrama, when I ask them, what is your name? They would say, I am Mr. this. Or still better, they would say, I am Mr. Or Doctor. I am Dr. Avinash Chatterjee. So I would sometimes look up in amazement and say, were you really born a doctor? The doctor was a title that you acquired later on. Why do you want to declare that you are a doctor even before I know you properly? But he's so well entrenched in this title that he always wants to wear it on your head, on his head always. I want to tell it to others as well. But when he gets into his own room, when she gets into his own, or her own room, those titles are no longer there, isn't it? You're a human being without those titles. But similarly, the Vedanta says, this title that you have this form, Rupa, and you have this name, Nama, is so well entrenched. You'll see this. Suppose all people leave this hall and go to the dining hall after the discussion is over. Huh? You go to the dining hall, Maharaj declares something, and people are busy with their own food, prasada. Maharaj goes on shouting loudly. Then somebody says, Vishwajit Babu, are you listening to me? Then Vishwajit Babu looks at him, isn't it? This happens. So every one of us, we are so much aligned to our own names. Name is important. In a group photo, every one of us, we say, let us see the group photo. But actually, we are looking for our own not everyone. I can assure you. You are first looking at your photo. So for every one of you, Rupa, form is important. We are ashamed to declare it to others or confess it to others. It is very important. We are so much engrossed in our name and form, Vedanta says that we have almost forgotten what our real self is. Our real self is not the body, not the name or the form. Okay. So just coming back to your question once again.
Why does the mind cling easily to the
So because we have heard this for so long, again and again, repeatedly, we have almost forgotten our real self. In fact, Hinduism stretches it back still further. It says we have had these impressions for earlier lives as well. So that to forsake these impressions would require a lot of cleaning and dusting. You must have a very good dishwasher, okay, a good teacher, good counsel, good advice, so that these are cleansed properly, to have a fresh view of life. Okay.
So one more question.
Yes.
What's the purpose of existence? If you look at human history, we've had from the Mahabharata, Ramayana, always suffering and people sort of cruelty. World wars, medieval times, wars again. The universe will be better off with no life in it, peace.
Actually, if it had been quiet all round, it would have been a peace of death, you know. If there is no life anywhere, everything would have been peaceful, isn't it? But today the buzzword is plurality, isn't it? Plurality. You require men and women of different shades, of different types, of different religions, of different languages. Society is meant to bring people of different kinds together, fuse them together. All of us, we have heard about the discipline of political science, isn't it? Political science, very nice discipline actually. That it discusses the evolution of society, how society had come up. They say, people when they started on at the beginning of civilization, they used to hunt on their own, take food on their own, protect themselves with their own weapons. But as they proceeded further along civilization, they understood that some form of specialization was good. You have got to have some people who would protect others. He was the soldier. Some people who would grow the crops. He was the farmer. So society is a question of mutual dependence on one another. There must be variety. There must be plurality, isn't it? But whenever you have people of different shades coming together, there must be diversity of opinions. And you cannot have harmony always. In a populous country like India, you have so many languages. Okay. Yesterday we had a discussion in Edinburgh about different kinds of religions. How can we accommodate different kinds of religions? Just see it in another way. In the same country of India, you have, I think there are more than 20 languages now. Officially 32, is it? Well, still larger number. So all of them do not have a very good literature for themselves, but at least 16, 17 of them have very good literatures, very good literature. In fact, the highest literary award in India is known as Jnana Pita Award. Jnana is knowledge, Pita is a seat, Jnana Pita Award. Many languages have novelists, poets who have won the Jnana Pita Award. Of course, we in the West see mainly about Rabindranath, but there are many great literatures in India. What I wanted to say is, a single country has so many languages. I tell you, it's very rare. So when you speak that why there are differences in such a land, I say it is obvious. So many languages, so many religions, and such an ancient civilization. In Bengali, we have a song, Nana Bhasha, Nana Mot, Nana Poridhan. Nana Bhasha is many languages, Nana Mot, various shades of opinion, Nana Poridhan, various types of clothes. You'll go the different states, you'll see people wear clothes in different ways. Even you see amongst Indians who come here during their festivals, their type of cloth wearing would be different. Okay. What I say is, in a single land, you have so much of variety. Whenever there is variety, there would be conflict as well. Resolution of conflict is real art. One who can do that actually can guide the society to the highest level. You cannot just iron out these differences. Swami Vivekananda says in one literature, in one lecture, he says, it is variety that causes the beauty of life. You'll see a photo, if you have more colors there, the photo is more agreeable to the eye, isn't it? I remember I went to Oxford University when I went to London. I'd gone there last time also. Me and the head of the London Center and some of the Oxford 2 persons were there with us. I said, well, Oxford is a great seat of knowledge, but sometimes you feel almost monotonous, the type of structure, the same dead structure. In the name of heritage, of course, it's a great seat of learning, but sometimes you miss the variety of colors. We need variety in life. We need persons of different ages also. Whenever you have persons of different ages, he probably won't have the same kind of thought as Professor Siddhartha Sen would have, isn't it? Because he has seen a lot of life and he has just started looking into life, isn't it? So our opinions would differ. Languages are different. Religions are different. So with this plurality, differences would come. You can't be without it. Right? Thank you. Yes? No, please.
Why didn't Krishna try, because Dronacharya and Bhishma were both sympathetic towards the Pandavas, why didn't Krishna try to get them on the Pandavas side?
Well, I have noted that he knew the stories well, because when I put the question, many of his answers were correct. Actually, I could give you an example. Huh? I hope it doesn't happen in your house.
Starting off with the wrong answer.
So, suppose as you grow up, you don't listen to what your mother is saying. Suppose it so happens. But beyond the time, beyond a period, even with the best of efforts, your parents are not able to correct you any further. What happens? Do they immediately banish you from your house? I hope they won't do that.
That's a very good hope.
So sometimes it can so happen that you reconcile to what is inevitable. Okay, you try the best, then you leave it as it at that. In fact, whenever we go, almost we as monks, our important duty is to give counsels to youngsters. Parents, they bring their boys or their girls. Last time we had it in Siddhartha Babu's house. One had come from Jhuma's family and one had come from Dona's family. One boy and one girl, and we were supposed to sit in the judgment seat of Vikramaditya and give long sermons to them. Okay. But don't their parents know what is good for them? Certainly they know. But sometimes it can so happen they are unable to implement what they think is right, isn't it? So similarly, although Krishna knew that Dronacharya or Bhishma sympathized with the Pandavas, they in fact said that because we work in the court of Duryodhana, we are bound by salt, that is food, to work for Duryodhana. We must fight for them. Although we sympathize with the cause of the Pandavas, we cannot fight for them. In fact, just to tell this interesting part, actually Duryodhana had a lingering doubt that Bhishma especially had a hidden sympathy for Arjuna. In fact, Gita starts off with an insult that tacitly Duryodhana did to Bhishma. What did he do? In the first phase, Bhishma is the leader of the troop, the field marshal, okay, of the Kauravas. Duryodhana, what he did was, in front of Bhishma, he went up to Dronacharya, the second in command, and said, Dronacharya, do you see the Pandavas all aligned against us? Look at them. They are so strong. So many of the good warriors. And you see, we have Bhishma, our general. Please take care of him, okay? This was consciously done, actually, okay? Because Duryodhana knew that this would ignite the anger within Bhishma. The little bit of sympathy that he had nurtured for Pandavas should be thrown out completely, absolutely added out. And he was successful in doing that. Because such a tremendous fighter Bhishma was in that age, that the Pandavas were unable to defeat him. Krishna, the ever wise, intelligent person, he told Arjuna that, you see, Arjuna, you cannot defeat Bhishma like this. So Arjuna said, what can we do then? Krishna told them, you see, he is the non-playing captain. Krishna is the non-playing captain. He doesn't play, but he's the captain. You see, the treaty of war says that only war goes in from sunrise to sunset. After that, we are friends. The tents are there, Kauravas and the Pandavas. We are free to mix amongst ourselves. You can do one thing. You can go to the tent of Bhishma and ask for his counsel about how to defeat him. Imagine, huh? So Arjuna is aghast. He says, what do you mean? I would kill him and I would listen to his advice, his counsels. Krishna said, why don't you try that, what I say? So he goes up to Bhishma. Bhishma, he smiles, he understands where from the advice to Arjuna. And he says, you see, there's a person known as Shikhandi, who actually is from the third gender. Okay. He's an Napumsaka. He was a girl in his earlier life. This girl had a strong attachment towards Bhishma. But Bhishma, then a young man, had taken a resolve that he would not marry. Then this girl committed suicide. And he is born as a Napumsaka, as name is Shikhandi. And Shikhandi has taken a deadly resolve that he would lead to the defeat or the death of Bhishma. So Bhishma advises Arjuna, one thing you can do, you take Shikhandi along with you. If he fights, I won't take up the bow. Because I know very well that he is actually a woman. I won't put my arrows against a woman. He was a woman in his earlier life, but Bhishma wouldn't fight against him. You can try that out. Arjuna gets the hint. Okay. And he did this only. Shikhandi was put in front, and as soon as Bhishma is at such an advanced state, he goes on fighting. He's such strong, so strong. He immediately left all his weapons. And Arjuna then is said to have made a bed of arrows for him. He struck so many arrows that Bhishma thus had to lay in a state of on a bed of arrows because he won't die. He had received a boon that he would only die when he himself wanted to. Of course, that came in later. So what I say is, although they were sympathetic towards them, they were truthful in their own commitments. Bhishma, Dronacharya. They knew that the Pandavas were right. But in spite of this, when you fight, you must not be treacherous. You must fight properly. Okay. Yes.
And what was the advice that who was the later again?
Bhagavan.
Who was the guy who
Bhishma.
Bhishma. So what was the advice that Bhishma gave to Yudhishthira on Rajdhan and the leadership of future king?
That's actually, this comes in later part of Gita. Mahabharata has so many stories. I can assure you, if you read the Mahabharata, modern novels can fall off the shelf. There are so many, actually many novels have been written based on Mahabharata also. Okay. Some of you might have read the book or heard of the book God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy? In fact, Arundhati Roy has one chapter where she shows the a play on the Mahabharata that has been enacted in a Kerala village, actually. She brings in this in the novel itself. So what I was saying was the Bhishma Pitamaha, once again, I lost the question once again.
What was the advice that he gave to you?
Acha, Yudhishthira, Acha. So Bhishma, when he was lying on his bed of arrows, at the end of the war, when the Pandavas had won the war, that is, their Kauravas had either been killed or was just about to die, like Duryodhana was. So Krishna tells Yudhishthira that now you're going to be the king of this entire kingdom. You go up to Bhishma and get his advice about how to run the kingdom. So this part is known as the Shanti Parva. Shanti is peace, and odd peace, because many people have died before that. Shanti Parva, okay? That's it. Then with Shanti Parva, it's a large part of the Mahabharata where Bhishma gives advice to Yudhishthira about duties of a king. Just to give a one-liner, I remember one English teacher telling us, you see, the king should not only be fair, okay, he should also look fair. It's not only just that I'm on the correct path, it should also be obvious to others that I'm on the correct path. I think the Prime Minister in Britain had some problem because during the Corona time, he had some feast in his own house. He had given out a notice that all of us must abstain from all merrymaking. And suddenly he does a small festivity in his own house. Apparently innocent one. I remember when I went to London, someone complaining, you see, Swamiji, it's such a small issue that dislodged this Prime Minister. Otherwise, he was an educated person. He was bold enough to take decisions during the Corona time. Other countries didn't open up. England had done. That's good. But see, because you are the Prime Minister, you stand at the head of the society. You are the role model with others, isn't it? So others expect that you should set the example by your actions. We are ready to pay taxes if we flout the rules. If I don't obey the Corona regulations, I would be fined, I would be caned, I would be taken to the jail, say. Okay? But when you make the rules and when you flout it, others are ghas, isn't it? So similarly for a king, he should act upon what he declares, what he says. Some advice of these kind were given to Yudhishthira by Bhishma. You must remember that Bhishma was actually like a grandfather to Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira was much younger in age. They would look up to Bhishma. Why? Because although he had fought for the Kauravas, he was a very just person. In fact, just for others to recollect a story, Bhishma's father, his name was Shantanu. He once met a woman and fell in love with her. He was already married by that time. And Bhishma was his son. He was now growing up. He came to know of his father's desire that he wanted to marry again. But his father was ashamed to say it to him. So Bhishma said that, okay, I'm ready to give up the throne. Why? Why should he give up the throne? Because the new bride of Shantanu, the second one, very intelligent lady, she said, you see, if I marry you, my sons won't have a right to the throne. Because Bhishma is there in line. Okay. When Bhishma came to know about that, he said, well, I won't have any claim to the throne. One resolve. Huh? This lady, difficult one, she says, probably Bhishma won't claim the throne, but his sons would. His sons, when they grow up, they would say, we are the rightful owner of the kingdom. Bhishma then made another resolve. What did he say? I won't marry even. So I won't have the kingdom for myself. Not only that, I won't marry. Why? Because so that my son, not to say about me, would have no claim to the throne. This lady was happy. Okay. It was then that Shantanu could marry again. That is why Bhishma had acquired a name of Deva Vrata. Deva means God. Vrata is a resolve. Such resolves he was able to make and carry out, which even the gods are like better human beings. Yes. In the Hindu concept, not the absolute God, God's a better variety of persons. You live on the first floor, gods live on the second floor, or on the 10th floor, or still have the 30th floor. A little more of the view of life, a better view of life, enjoy more of life than you are. The Hindu scriptures even say, karmas, good works are over. They would again come back to this earth again. Eh? Just like when your bank deposits are over, you have enjoyed the fruits of life, again come back and earn for something for yourself. Even if you are at an advanced age, you have to earn something now. If your bank deposits are no longer there. Similarly, when the devas are done with their good deeds, they have to come back again. So such devas, even they are afraid of taking such resolves and executing them. Bhishma had taken such a resolve. So the devas were like human beings only in the Hindu epics. Huh? They were like better human beings, that is all. They would marry sometimes, more than once even. That wasn't the issue. So Devabrata, Bhishma, he took up that resolve. That is why he was so venerated. Even Krishna advised the Pandavas that for proper justice, you must go up to him. How to lead pious, righteous, brave life. Sometimes we, in the name of piety or goodness, we consider to be a goody person, isn't it? A person who can't fight probably. They only whisper things in public. He can't say something out in public or fight for a just cause. Not Bhishma. He's a strong person. He was even easily capable of defeating the Pandavas, unless the Krishna was there by their side. Okay. Some such advice again. But running out of questions. Good. Baba.
I have one.
Contour. Yes, certainly. Why not? Question and answer are meant to be ignite something. Yes.
Do you want to go in? No.
Okay.
Finish yours.
So
I think just a minute. There were no ladies with questions still. I'll give her a priority. Yes.
So this is with regard to what you were saying about the ego and how we associate ourselves with our name, Nama Rupa Lita Vibhuti that we were talking about. So which is very natural. We grow up. The first things that our parents teach us is your name is so and so. What is your name? Tell everyone. So why, and that is the reason why we cannot, the ego comes in and everything is because of that. So how transcend that and live in the real life?
That's a good question, actually. Huh? Actually, in the society, when it tells about marriage, about family life, about society life, in a way, it is taking you towards that. When you are a mother of a household, you must perforce sacrifice for the sake of others. Probably, suppose, before marriage, you had lived a life of a student, say. Okay. And when after marriage, you come to your household, you look around and see your in-laws, you feel the need for sacrifice. Sometimes probably you resent it even. Okay. You feel, why should I get so late in my food? It can so happen that sometimes you have to feed others and then take your own food. Your inner self sometimes can have a small quarrel. It would say, why? Why should I go on sacrifice again and again? But it so happens when goodness prevails beyond a point. It tells you, no, this is a better cause. So society actually takes you towards unselfishness or sacrificing for others. Okay. What does sacrifice helps actually? Sacrifice helps in gradually taking out this individualistic self. When you work for others, you feel a strange satisfaction. I remember in 1982, when I was a college student, my younger brother is there with me, he knows well. I had come for a youth conference in Belur. It was held in the Belur College. It was a residential youth conference. Many of us were college students or university students. Some of us, even doctors, we would consider ourselves to be educated persons. But the Ramakrishna Mission had queer plans. Just behind the Belur College, there was a very dingy lane actually. There still, the bathrooms were of the old type, khata paikhana, where the latrines were all over. They didn't have proper latrines even. So I remember we were barely 20 at the time. We had to clean up many of those bathrooms in those areas. Did we like this very much? Of course we didn't. But after we did, a strange sense of service came to us. Okay, we thought, well, it was good to work for others. Sometimes when you are forced into a thing, I remember a story of a Punjabi gentleman. Of course, it isn't meant to make fun out of anyone. It is said that there was one ocean liner going in the ocean. And then people were on board enjoying the ocean. There was also a small boy like he is. So suddenly it so happens that the boy falls off the jetty, falls off the board from the ship, falls into the river. Everyone cries, "Hurry, what happens? What happens? What is the Everyone is moaning. None can do anything now. So he has already gone to deep waters. So everyone watched in astonishment that a Punjabi Sikh suddenly plunges into the ocean. Okay. And finally he rescues that boy also and brings him on board. Everyone felicitates him, said, "Arey Baba Singh, what wonderful work you have done." And he's asked to give a lecture to them. And he goes on the podium and says, "Then, well, you're all listening to me?" They said, "Yes, we are listening." He said, "Before I start the lecture, please raise your hands and confess who pushed me first into the lecture." So this happens in real life also. Okay, this happens in real life also. Sometimes we are pushed into a situation and then we realize that unselfishness is good. So Swamiji had started this concept of karma yoga. Starting means he had asked even the monks of this religious order, Ramakrishna Mission, to have a life of sacrifice for the sake of others, for a higher goal. Atmano mokshatam jagat hitaya. Jagat hita means welfare of the world. Why? Only social service? No. It is meant for spiritual illumination. Atmana mokshartam. Moksha means liberation. For this cause, when you serve others, gradually you have this for yourself. I am in this order for 37 years now. Okay, I remember when last time someone asked me, "Maharaj, did you have an illumination? Did you realize anything?" I was left questioning myself. I said, "You see, not really. But one thing can assure you, by gradually leading a life of service, of prayers, you feel a confidence within that goodness is worth living. A life of sacrifice is worth living. We workers, just to repeat the obvious, we don't draw any salaries for ourselves. We are totally honorary workers, okay? It's not the same in all religious orders, because I have Christian fathers who are known to me. They draw their regular salaries, okay? Because that's their views, that their minimum maintenance grant, they ought to have that for themselves. But we in the Ramakrishna Mission are strictly forbidden from accepting any salaries or any honorarium. Okay. In fact, Maharaj told you that I did some research after joining the Ramakrishna Mission. I remember in my younger days, I would feel a little reluctant because other brahmacharis, all of them are working hard in the monastery. And I indulge in going to the research institute and doing research for myself. Okay, I would feel reluctant. I would feel apologetic. I went up to the senior Swamiji. He is now the president of the order now, Swami Smarananandji. I told him, Maharaj, if I apply for the entrance examination of the research scheme, I believe I would be able to get the scholarship for research. If I take the research grant or the scholarship, I'll be paying it, the entire thing, to the Ramakrishna Mission. Would you allow me to do that? I still remember his answer. He told me that, well, you allow me to think for a while. So next day when I came up to him, he told me, you see, my name is Ananda. He told me, Ananda, did I ever tell you, did we ever tell you that we need money for your maintenance when you're studying? I said, I was slightly flabbergasted. I said, no, Maharaj, I didn't do that. You didn't do that. And he quietly told me, you see, when you sign and take a money, you own the money. As a monastic member, you shouldn't lay claim to money. You are meant to be a totally honorary member. Sometimes we get confused with the logic, isn't it? When we look at the others and look around, we feel we could have earned something for ourselves. That tendency lingers on. He rubbed it out of me. I said, no, you must be a fully honorary member. Don't crave for that money. Don't look around. Don't compare yourself with others. Because I looked around and felt that, well, others who are JRF, you must be remembering, junior research fellows, they easily are earning the money. I could also earn it for myself and probably pay it to the Ramakrishna Mission as well. But he quietly diffused the situation. So being like this for years, it creates an impression. Gradually, vacillations of the mind, they're ironed out. Don't we have vacillations? We too have it. Just as say, when a professor goes to an institute and teaches there, he can feel it that way. Well, if I could have gone to a better university, probably to Oxford or Cambridge or to Harvard, should I apply for them? Many posts are getting vacant again and again. Then he looks around, look at his family all around and say, no, it's difficult for me to dislocate now, relocate myself. It's better to stay on here. So sometimes this urge to improve on, to seek for greener pastures would be there. But when you go on sticking to one cause, good cause, you must be there, tooth and nail. In Sanskrit, there's a word dhriti. Dhriti means perseverance. When you hold on to a difficult track, then only you can get the benefits out of that, not without. Isn't it? Okay. It's more than 7:30 now. You can end up.
We had a very good scholastic talk, I believe, about Mahabharata and about Bhagavad Gita. Of Bhagavad Gita, we have to study and understand the whole of our life. Probably it reminds me a story. Once one youngster had come in. Swami, you don't have any other work other than doing meditation and study. But we have a lot of work. So we don't have time to read so much Bhagavad Gita. So can you tell in a nutshell? That's so that we can understand Bhagavad Gita very fast. So I was thinking what to tell. And I said, there are 700 shlokas, because even probably earlier people had said, so every chapter they have condensed for few shlokas or one shloka. So it runs after 18 shlokas you can read. So Swami, I am very good in Sanskrit. I want instant. I'm the WhatsApp page, so I want instant. Can you tell in a very nutshell? I don't want to study even 80 shlokas. Then probably I was thinking, then just the two words, the first two words of the Bhagavad Gita starts with, all we know, Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetre Samaveta Yutsavaha Mamaka Pandavascheva Kimakurvata. When we joined the monastery, the pontiff of the ashram had asked us to bahak every day. So one sloka every day we had to bahak and we had to present it. So we used to discuss among our brahmacharis and novices. Why Krishna taught so much? You have to bahak 700 slokas. He could have given in a snapshot, like that implemented. Anyhow, so when I was thinking of this Dharma Kshetra Kurukshetra, these two words, one who knows this vibhakti and grammar and all, if you break it, Dharma, Kshetra, Kuru, Kshetra. So 4 words it becomes, and if just you jumble it, it becomes Kshetre, Kshetre, Dharmam Kuru, Saptami Vibha. Means Kshetra is body, the other Kshetra is also our worker field or external field or work field. So Kshetre, internally, Kshetre, externally, Dharmam Kuru. Practice Dharma, this is the essence of Bhagavad Gita. So probably what we can understand from Bhagavad Gita is practice Dharma, practice our righteousness, practice the good thing, practice whatever we are supposed to do, practice, and at the same time we have to renounce and we should not do whatever we are not supposed to. That is the essence of Gita. Swami has brought this philosophical truth in his own way, his scholastic talk. So eventually,
Tomorrow's
yes, I convey my pronouns to Swamiji and my personally, and also on the devotees online and offline. Also tomorrow we have got a talk, message of forest. So one the devotee was saying, what is the message from forest? They say Upanishads. It is nothing but Upanishads. So tomorrow we have got message of the Upanishads. So I ask all the devotees, I invite all the devotees tomorrow to attend also. 5:30, 6:30 now afterwards we have Vesper service, then we'll have followed by supper prasad tomorrow, of course. Also we can invite other friends and relatives and the family people for tomorrow. Thank you.